It's about to go
Those numbers
live.
shouldn't be red. Yeah. Those numbers shouldn't be red.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another virtual CANNAtalk session. We have folks from around the world literally on this talk. We have representation from the east coast of Canada all the way to the west coast of Canada. We have people in South Africa coming online, and we have our AV team that's from the UK. So we're hitting quite a few time zones today, and really exciting. I'm really happy to have this panel on today. First, I'd like to thank CANNA for organizing this event and being leaders in education, support, and developing our industry. And I'm very pleased to facilitate this panel. But before we get going, a couple of housekeeping items that we'd like to highlight. So this is an interactive session. So we encourage participants to submit questions that we will take as the session is going. So we're not necessarily going to wait for a Q&A period at the end. So as the topics are going, please feel free to use the Q&A section. We've also received a few questions ahead of time that we will throw in there for the panelists. And everybody else will be muted, so nobody can speak. So please use the Q&A section. So if you're watching on the CANNA website, you should see the QA box just below your screen where you can punch in your question, and it will show up on our system, and we'll go ahead and ask it. And if not, you can, if you're watching in full screen mode, you can use the QR code on the top right corner with your mobile device, and it'll prompt you to get into the Q&A section. So please feel free to send some questions to these awesome panelists that we have on today. So for this discussion, we brought today this lineup to discuss the state of our industry, the potential for international markets, and some of the barriers of entry. So we're very, very fortunate to be joined here by these four gentlemen. First, I'd like to introduce Deepak Anand. He's the head of consulting at Gateway Proven Strategies Global. They offer end-to-end cannabis consulting services for investors, innovators, incumbents, and government institutions, scaling to each brand's needs. Sean McDougall, he's the head of production and procurement at East Can Craft. They are a small group of legacy growers situated in the City of Lakes, Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. With over 20 years of experience, their focus is and always has been premium flower quality. Chad Esch, master grower, head of production at CANNA, a South African cannabis company whose efforts are focused on the growth, cultivation, processing, and export of medicinal EU GMP cannabis products to the international market. And finally, Tanner Stewart. He is the CEO of Stewart Farms, a unique cannabis and wellness company located in the picturesque border town of St. Stephen. And I have to say, it truly is. I was there just a few weeks ago. And it's adjacent to the stunning Bay of Fundy. And they have a passion for the plant, helping people feel better, and Mother Nature itself. If you would like to have more information on our panelists' specific bios, please visit the CANNAtalk invites, and the links are on there, and the full bios and some contact information. All right. Are we ready to get into this conversation about international markets? Deepak, I'm going to start with you since I've followed your career for over a decade now, and you've traveled the globe, and you're very, very much involved in international regulatory and government relations. So I'm really looking to get your perspective on what are some of these international opportunities that are out there? What do they look like? And highlight some of the misconceptions that people have about international markets.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nico. Very excited to be part of this discussion and talking about a very, very relevant and pertinent topics. So I'd say, there's a lot happening on the international stage. And when you look at countries that are legalizing cannabis, both now most recently for recreational or adult use purposes, but more importantly, ones that have actually legalized for medical purposes. I think that's really where a lot of the opportunities lie. And one of the big, two of the big markets that really come to mind are Germany, of course. Both having legalized medical cannabis now for several years is certainly a growing market, and a number of changes that are about to come forward with respect to touching on recreational cannabis, but also having impacts in medical cannabis is actually quite exciting. So Germany is a very, very exciting market. And the second one that's super exciting also is Australia. And most recently, as we'll talk through this panel session here, recent changes to TGO 93 and GMP requirements in Australia are super interesting to watch. So I'd probably say those are the two most interesting kind of markets that I'm looking at. You asked a myth, Nico. I'd probably say looking to bust some myths here. I think GMP and EU GMP is something that has really been talked about for a long time, but is not necessarily where it's at, for at least for certain markets. So if you're looking to get into the German market, there's a number of ways to be able to get into the market without necessarily having EU GMP. So excited to talk about that as well through this session and kind of get into it some more.
Excellent. Oh, thank you for that, Deepak. That really highlights quite a few things. Just quickly, a little follow up. You mentioned it's mostly on the medical side, correct? Is there any recreational interesting markets out there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, recreational is really interesting when you look at this from a domestic perspective, right? I think to give the audience a little bit of just a refresher when you talk about international trade, unfortunately, recreational cannabis is very limited because there are UN treaties that prevent kind of cannabis being treated truly as a commodity and crossing international borders, right? We've seen Canada, of course, having legalized cannabis at the recreational level, but really haven't seen any imports or exports for non-medical and scientific cannabis that have either come into or left Canada. And so there's a number of nuances from a international perspective when it comes to transfer or movement of goods, particularly as it relates to cannabis on the international stage. However, if you look at it from a domestic perspective, Germany is certainly very, very exciting because they're about to, unroll a number of things that will have impacts, domestically. And there's certainly domestic businesses in Germany that are gearing up and setting up towards targeting the recreational market. And we're seeing this now happen really across the globe. There are a lot of momentum in Thailand and some of the other markets. But when you actually peel the layers of the onion back and figure out where the opportunities are to make money now, it's really on the
Mm,
medical side. And that's where
yeah.
it's super interesting, at least to me.
Okay, great. Well, that's thank you. So, if speaking on the medical side and all that, I've been kind of working with Chad and his team for a few years now. So I know that they are somewhat uh, going to that market. So, Chad, you're the only one on this panel currently that is EU GMP certified. I know Tanner will get to your certification in a bit, but Chad, like, can you describe a little bit of that process? Because I think a lot of us, that's some of this misconception that we hear in Canada. There's like 8 different certifications that people talk about and throw around, and they don't know who and how it works. So is there a quick way to describe the process, kind of who's your certification body, or some of the things that you can share with us, how long it took, and what are the pain points, I guess, because I think a lot of people on this call are very much interested in understanding this.
Yeah, sure, Nico. Thanks. First of all, thanks for having me on the webinar. I'm keen to be a part of this. And I'd say to begin, so the people that are going to be the body that regulate it and do the inspection are BESREG. And there's basically 2 parts to EU GMP, which is part 1 and part 2. So part 2 would cover API manufacturers, and part 1 would cover finished product manufacturers. So the difference is based on the way you've set your business up, obviously, at the end of the day. And the timelines around getting this sort of certification took us about a year and a half to 2 years. and there's actually a current waiting list of about 2 years. So it's a lengthy process, and it's a huge learning curve. And unfortunately, there isn't like a straight guide as to what you need to do to be able to achieve this. And there's not a lot of people in the world that can help you to prepare for these sort of inspections. So often it's kind of a shot in the dark, but at the end of the day, it's really just about being able to produce good, clean, and safe product. And if you're able to justify that within your processes, it's easily achievable.
So you mentioned that I like that you said there's not a lot of people that can help you and guide you, and I've done some consulting work, same as Deepak. He's still a consultant, and so were you able to do the process within house, or did you have to hire a consultant to get ready for the certification? Because the certification is a separate entity; it's the people certifying you, but the whole internal process in between, were you able to do that on your own, or did you have to go and reach out to consultants?
No, I mean, of course, we weren't able to do it on our own. We obviously had to look at help from the outside, like yourselves, Nico, and it's just difficult to reach those sort of people because there aren't that many people that understand the industry or understand EU GMP in its totality. That's kind of what I meant when I said it's difficult to find people to help, but those people obviously exist. It's just that they aren't easy to find.
Great. Thank you.
And
Thank you. So Tanner, oh, sorry, Chad, did you have something else to add?
no, just another thing is there's obviously a big part of our ability to achieve this comes from the internal team. It's made up of significantly experienced people that have worked in the pharmaceutical industry for quite some time, and those sort of professionals make a huge difference when it comes to quality assurance, responsible pharmacists, because EU GMP really does cover more of the pharmaceutical manufacturing side of things. It doesn't really focus on the cultivation side of things. And without those people, it's really difficult to achieve. If you've got a facility that's made up of a bunch of growers and people that have worked in a recreational facility, it's going to be really difficult for you to do it on your own.
Excellent point. Wow, I really like that. So a strong QA team, even more so important on the GMP, is what I'm gathering compared to on the Canadian side, where we can actually do some sales without a QA at all, right? If you do B2B. So very, very interesting. I'd like to circle to Tanner, because now we talked about the EU GMP. Tanner, you've recently received a GMP certification. Can you explain the type of certification, how the process, and what kind of market opportunities this opens up for you?
Yeah, well, we're only on shipment number 2 to Australia, so I'm the newest exporter on this call for sure. So it's thank you. So it is all brand new.
Wicked.
And it's all sold out. Both
great.
batches sold out very quickly. So, but at the same time, now we've just entered into this kind of void of the unknown, to tell you the truth, right now. So we're interpreting the GMP changes from the Australian regulatory body, and what we did is we went ahead and we got a Canadian GMP certification audit from a local auditing authority here in Canada, and we're actually simultaneously using that audit and that permit that was provided by the certifying body here in Canada. They're an inspection agency, and they're certified under the WHO to do these audits and issue these permits. And we're simultaneously submitting that GMP audit and approval and permit to the Canadian government and to the Australian government at the same time, right? To get both regulatory bodies to adhere to their audit inspection, and our import partner in Australia is at the same time working with the regulatory body in Australia, and we're both hoping that we can get this through and approved within the next 30 days, because I have my third load ready to go. It's ready to ship. So we're kind of so we're entering a little bit of a gray area here, and you know, the good news
Yeah.
is, just like Health Canada, when our importer is sending questions to the regulatory body, there's a lot of fogginess on the process, right? So, but what I can say, you know, generally, and I don't know where our audience is sitting at, but if you're sitting at ground zero and you're saying, you know, and you're thinking, man, what is this? What is GMP? And you know, what are these certifications, and are they going to cost me? You know, is somebody going to come in and inspect my facility and tell me it's built completely wrong? Well, no, probably not, right? Your facility more than likely is fine. What it is, it's paperwork. It really is paperwork. It's more
Yeah.
paperwork. It's process auditing. It's and it doesn't need to be scary, you know, whether it's EU GMP. I mean, you just heard it's a 2-year timeline. Okay. Well, it's a 2-year timeline, and that's probably the worst part of it. And then you're going to get these audits, and the first audit is going to be like, wow, your paperwork needs 50 or 100 new things added to it, right? You need more check boxes, you need more inspection points.
Hmm.
You got to store those materials a little bit differently, or you need to label this a little bit differently, right? You know, it's very unlikely, unless your facility is just absolutely horrible, that you're going to end up in this big capital expenditure. It's all paperwork,
Okay.
process, and time, right? And at least that's my
What?
assessment of it. And you know, and jump in, you know, jump into it and just start the process, right? Where and that's the best way to get
Yeah.
your company sorted out.
Well, that is some better news. I was a little shocked that there is such a timeline for a certification, but the good news that you're bringing to the table, Tanner, is the capex. You know, a lot of people get scared of that because that's the first thing you think of. Is like, oh my god, I have to rejig my whole building and all that. So you're saying it's definitely more so on the process, the paperwork, and it kind of falls into what Chad was saying earlier, that it again, it's on the pharma side of things, not so much on the cultivation. No, really, really cool. So, besides Australia, this certification, does this open you up for other countries, or is this specific to Australia right now?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is, as far as I know, and Deepak can comment further to this. This will be only specific to Australia right now, and that has a
Okay.
lot to do, I believe, with the free trade agreements between Canada and Australia, and recognizing
Okay.
each other's GMP certifications. Where, you know, obviously, this the minute you get to one of the many countries in Europe, well, they want EU, they want EU
Yeah.
Yeah,
GMP. Yeah.
yeah. One of the things that I'll probably chime in and just say is, Tanner, I hope you're getting your awesome bath bombs to Australia, because for those that don't know, Tanner has an awesome offering of bath bombs and is also very passionate about taking baths.
Yeah,
You
I
mean
agree with
Nonetheless,
that.
these bath bombs, Deepak? Are these the
Yeah.
ones you mean?
exactly, exactly. But I wanted to pick up on something that Chad said
Very
because I
good
think it's a
bath
very
bombs. Yeah.
important point. And that one is basically that, you know, you can't look at this as a one size fits all approach. So just because you've gotten EU GMP certification, that is table stakes, right? You need to figure out what it is that you're going to do next. So if you're going to target the German market as an example, you need to figure out what you're going to do as an example for microbials. And it's very different from what you're going to do in the Polish market, and very different from what you're going to do in the Danish market, and very different from what you're going to do in the UK market. So it's not a one size fits approach. And I think Chad makes an excellent point with respect to really having to understand intimately what market you're actually trying to serve, and then trying to make sure that you're addressing all of your regulatory requirements, because the international regulatory landscape when it comes to the movement of cannabis flower couldn't be more differentiated and more different, right? Every market is
Mhm.
completely different from the other. So this is not a one size fits all approach. I think often I have clients come and say to me, great, we've got GMP, now I can sell it to the whole world, right? And it's like, no. Now you got to figure out, which markets you're going to target. And, you're going to, in many cases, need a completely different grow room if you're selling to Denmark as opposed to selling to Israel versus Germany. So it's very
Mm.
important to very intimately understand which specific market that you're trying to target and what the regulatory requirement for those markets is.
Very, very interesting. No golden ticket here, I guess. So really, yeah. Thank you, Deepak. Really, in short, understanding where you want to play and go play in the rules, right? So Sean, you've been quiet for a
Yes.
bit there. So I want to throw a question at you because you guys, EastCan, the way you operate it is slightly different than most producers in Canada. You're not quite certified yet, but you do export, I believe. And but I'd like to for you to explain how your production works, your partnerships, and your collaborations, and how that opens up your market opportunities.
Well, thanks again, Nico, for this is great having on being on this panel. It's wonderful. Thanks. Yeah, no, I guess we go back to like how things were a little bit different in the legacy market, where there was people that um, shopped for weed that had a float, and there was people that grew it, that sold to the people with the float, and product moved. It was always small batch, and it always filled, the higher end flowers areas. So our approach really is a lot of collaboration and trying to find those growers that check all the boxes and knock it out of the park, and they're it's a good relationship with that kind of grower. They're used to growing high quality. They're used to getting to the finish line, and we can plan on harvest dates and things with folks like that. So it really plays well with us in sense of the growing side. We know what we need to grow. We like to try to find those growers, and then we grow the same strains. So we'll maybe have three growers growing the same strain, and we'll decide on how it's allocated regarding to how it finishes and where we want to send it. Obviously, our domestic market is THC driven, so the highest THC products would end up in our domestic market, and the other one or two growers that are growing the other product, depending on how it fits into that program. Um, it's yeah, that's where we're at there.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
this collaboration and group of folks, is this just for domestic, or do you also ship internationally?
Yes, we also ship internationally as well. So we supply the Israeli market, the Australian market. We have EU GMP facilities and GMP facilities that we work with as well. So again, being part of the team, a collaborative effort on everybody's behalf to kind of make it make it get to where it needs to go. I think us as a country of Canada, I think between all of the grows and all the people that are here growing and the quality of in the flower market anyway, I think all of us could probably get together and really supply a large market together as a group, as a whole country, compared to try to, you know, try to find ways to alienate yourself or try to find ways to,
Mhm.
yeah. So, yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right there.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So very, very interesting how it's not really contract growing, right, Sean? It's more collaboration, or is it contract growing?
Yeah, it in a sense it's contract growing. Some of the growers grow their strains that are growing that are gaining traction in the international market. We also use some of them in the domestic market, but they will get more money for their product because it's their strain. They hunted it, and it's just that's
Gotcha.
how that would work. And with our own strains, that people are if they're growing them, generally a lot of them are growing consistent, strong growers with a really high end product is what we're going for. And you know, by having those growers, they're really happy with their price per gram as well. Because really, at the end of the
Mm.
day, we're trying to pay a good price per gram in the sense that everyone that's growing are strong growers, and if they're not growing for our team, they're growing for another team because there's probably you're starting to see little not groups, but just groups of growers, groups of people working for different people that are supplying different markets and building relationships with them. So it's
Yeah.
that's the other big part of it as well, is the relationship building that's needed to make that relationship work. Are they great growers, but are they also good at doing business? Because with the EU GMP and the GMP side of things, there's so many things that so many boxes that have to be checked that require just people having their stuff together. So we're learning
Yeah.
that. We've been at it a couple of years now, and we're learning how it's not a perfect model, but we're finding ways to make it work for sure.
I want to pick up,
Awesome.
if you don't mind, on
Go for it.
Sean's
Yeah.
comment of having a good price per gram, and I just want to add to that a little bit. When it's hard enough having partnerships within Canada in the cannabis industry, right? And when you start exporting internationally, and you've got all these different logistical issues, you really need to make sure that anybody who's in that supply chain has that mutual understanding that everybody has to make money, and you're in it for each other to make money. And to back up a little bit from
Yeah,
that, that actually means aligned vision of what you're all trying to do in that particular market, right? So if you, just like any province in Canada, if you enter the Australian market as an example, and you really don't understand what you're trying to accomplish there or the genetics you're trying to put out and why, and then you have a buyer, which I don't. I have a great partner over there. But if you had a buyer that, every conversation you're having is, how much cheaper can you get this to me, right? We need to
Yeah.
lower our price, and then you're going down the line. Like, I've got some contract farmers as well, just like Sean. So we're supporting this network of other farmers. And then you're going back to them and saying, hey, do you want to lose money to grow for me, to supply to the guy that's asking me
Yeah.
to lose money in
right.
whatever
Yeah.
country?
Yeah,
That's unsustainable, right? And the
Hmm.
quality that is coming out of Canadian growers is world class. I mean, there isn't an import demand in Canada because our weed sucks. I mean, there's some bad weed in Canada. Don't get me wrong, it's out there,
yeah,
uh, but
Mm.
it's also some of the best weed in the world is coming out of Canada at the same time, right? So we've got something to offer, and it's worth something as well, right? So
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
Tanner's
And
right there. It's a for sure.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Sean.
No, that's fine, Nico. Sorry, go ahead. You were saying.
Okay. No, very interesting. But I like what you said, that it's a collaboration, that everybody is making money, right? That's the important factor here. And if the end result is just the cheaper, 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 is that the market we want to go after, right? Because I
yeah,
mean, there's different markets, and are
yeah.
we getting at the point? I think we're starting to stabilize. I mean, that's a question that's coming up right now. Actually, I'm just looking at my other screen. So, do you think that Canada is going to turn around in the next year? What does that even mean, turn around? Is that in regards of understanding consumers? Is that the supply and demand production balance? Um, I think personally, I'm going to put my two tidbits quickly on this one, and I'd like to go around quickly on do you think Canada is going to turn around in the next year? I think this is going to be a hard year. I think this is going to be a hard year in Canada, where a lot of people are going to have a little bit of a awakening. That's my thought.
Yeah,
Deepak?
Yeah, I think you're right on that, Nico. I think it's certainly, we haven't seen the bottom of this. I think there's still going to be, unfortunately, more more bankruptcies, more kind of downturn. But kind of sticking to the theme of the panel a little bit, I want to touch base on a comment Tanner made, and certainly proud Canadian here from my perspective, but I have a slightly different opinion, and that is that Canada has been a world leader with respect to exports of medical cannabis so far, but that's really been because there hasn't really been a lot of competition globally. Where we're seeing this go in 23 is that's picking up, whether it be Lesotho, South Africa, Colombia, and I'm most recently allowed to export. I do agree that there is some good quality cannabis coming out of Canada, but I wouldn't underestimate kind of some of the competition coming online. And yes, it's not just about price per gram, but that definitely plays a factor. I think that coupled with I just came back from my CBC in Berlin, and it was really interesting to see the government of New Zealand and the government of Australia actually promoting their domestic cannabis industry. And unfortunately, what was missing was the Canadian government, right? I think the Canadian government has done nothing to support the community. And if you look at this strictly from a balance of trade perspective, don't even talk about cannabis, it's a significant global trade that's currently occurring. I mean, Canada in 22 made up of 80% of German exports, which, imports came in from Canada, right? So Canada was exporting in a very significant way. And I think unless companies start to really get support in Canada from the Canadian government on the international stage, it's going to start to become a bit more challenging in that market as new countries come online. And to Chad's point, people are figuring it out. There are companies in Colombia that have
Mm-hmm.
gotten EU GMP certification. Chad, of course, sitting in South Africa, has gotten EU GMP certification. So the competition is picking up, and I see that certainly being in 23 and 24 a bit more heat on Canada. I certainly don't see a dominant position changing, but I do think there's going to be more competition.
Really good. Yeah,
Uh,
I'd have to agree with that. Sean, did you have a small comment on the state of the Canadian of this year?
well, I go back to there's a couple of comments there. One is I think, like you're saying, that it's going to be a hard year for some people and some companies, and a lot of it is finding a way to work with some people and not be able to try to do everything yourself and find the people that are strong. We're fortunate enough to have a strong international people that are good at selling internationally, and then we have a strong team of people that are good at procuring and growing the product. And to go to what you're saying about the competition, it's strong, but you got to think like, so if say you're growing 20 years, in that 20 years you may grow 5 or 6, 7, maybe 7 gardens a year at the most over 20 years. That doesn't add up to a lot of gardens in experience. And then
Mm-hmm.
you get into 3 and 4 years in the legal space and how many gardens you have under your belt. And you think that how many years it takes to get to the quality and the level of product that is coming out right in Canada. That's a pretty steep learning curve for those other countries to catch up on. I think it says a lot about how deep our roots are here and how strong
Mm-hmm.
where that quality comes from. And I'm really fortunate to think that we have a great country here, and we're a small enough country that we should be all, we can all work together and try to create that environment where we're supplying the world with our cannabis as a whole country instead of looking at individual markets and smaller groups trying to fit in there. It's There's only so many EU GMP facilities. There's only so
Mm-hmm.
many GMP facilities, and that's why I think with a country of our size, I think it's not a bad idea to look at uh, working together for sure.
So thanks, Sean. To play a little bit devil's advocate, because we don't all have Canadians on the panel here. Chad, I know
Okay,
that
yeah, no, of course.
Yeah, Chad's coming for us. Chad's coming for
Okay,
us.
let's
coming
go,
for us.
He's like, screw you guys.
that's the
So
best.
I
That's the best.
Chad's experience. I mean, you learned a lot of your trade, Chad, in California in Humboldt County.
There you go.
So I mean, I agree with what they've said. I think it's not necessarily just Canada. I think it's North America, I would call it. I think the
Right.
US has a very, very strong cannabis culture. I think this comes from the culture. But I'd like to know a little bit like how this like affected Chad in a sense in South Africa. Do you see the same kind of thing we're talking about like, are we being a little bit nose in the air, Chad, as in us Canadians, we grow the best flower? Or is this something that kind of holds true? Can you compare your production to other South African production, let's say, or similar?
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a really good point because at the end of the day, like you say, most of the people that are occupying these GMP and EU GMP facilities in countries like South Africa and South America and all over Europe, to be honest, are filled with growers and people that don't have the experience that you guys do have. So there is a huge learning curve that has to take place when it comes to what quality flour is, just to begin with. But I think the industry is growing so rapid, it's not going to be as extensive as it was for you guys because it was kind of different. And this is a forceful industry, really. There's a lot of money being invested, and there's a lot of interest coming from global players, and things are being fast tracked to a good limit. But you make a real good point because in South Africa, it's really difficult to find growers that understand cannabis in its simplest form, and I'm really grateful that I have the experience that I have from California. So yeah, for sure, most facilities are going to struggle, but at the end of the day, it also depends on what you determine as quality, and the cost per gram is definitely going to be a huge factor. And if we could get to the same level of quality at the end of the day, what's going to determine where they buy that product from, to be honest.
Hmm. Yeah, very good,
Yeah,
very good.
yeah,
So, go ahead, Sean.
Was that
yeah. I was gonna say with Chad, yeah, like agreeing with Chad there too. Like people now they'll be getting into these facilities, and within a year they have a whole slew of gardens under their belt, and they can start. The learning curve is quick too, for the bigger for these other countries as well. That we're spreading that over a long period of time. It's the equivalent
Hmm.
of walking up a hill to ski and then having a ski hill to ski down, like a chairlift to take you up. And if you the amount of runs you're going to put in, so the new markets where people are allowed to grow indoors and are not and have the capabilities of growing that, it's not going to take long for growers from different areas to come and help set up their process, and all of a sudden the competition becomes really strong, over the next 5 years. That kind of, I'm just
Hmm.
throwing that number out, like, but you know what, you can see it for sure.
Well, and Canadians like to travel too, right? I know excellent Canadian grower that is in Israel right now, and he's doing fantastic in Israel, right? So I think we're going to start sharing some of that knowledge that we've accumulated over our cannabis culture that we've had, that's been maybe a little bit stronger than other countries. So coming back to this whole, I want to kind of stay on theme about our markets and opportunities on where we can sell product, because in the end of the day, that's the answer we're trying to answer here is, where do we sell our product? How do we do this? How do we stay viable? Tanner, how important is this international market compared to your domestic? Is this something that you're looking at growing even more? Are you looking at other certification to open up other countries potentially, or are you riding it out short term for the domestic market?
No, I mean, for me, and we're very tiny compared to a lot of these big guys that are exporting over there. But it's immensely important to me. I mean, for one thing, uh, when we export to another country, we don't pay this thing called tax. There's no excise tax when you export to other countries. Let me repeat, the Canadian government does not take the taxes from your pocket when you export. So, uh, for me, every load I send to Australia, I don't have this insane tax liability. And let's be frank here, until just to go back quickly to the state of the industry, the domestic Canadian industry is going to continue to be a massive shit show until there's large scale tax reform, and you only have the Liberal government to blame for that right now, and that's a fact. And they need to cut the taxes, and they need in recreational and medical. Just a quick snippet: medical cannabis in Canada, unlike other countries, like in Australia, as an example, is taxed. It's the only prescription drug in Canada that has a tax on it. And it's also probably the only domestically produced drug in Canada where 100% of the revenues go to Canadian staff and employees and workers and mothers and fathers and families, right? So I'm going to, yeah, it stays in the country.
Let's bring it back off the tax, because that tax thing could be a whole discussion.
And we're taxed at death. Sorry, let me get back to why I like exporting. So there's no tax, right? And a secondary to that, my partner in Australia, because we have an aligned vision, we're lucky because we're on the jar in Australia. We're co-branded. I just so ecstatic and happy about that. So we're building a brand in Australia. Yeah, we're getting. People are knowing us. Our social media is blowing up with new Australian followers, and we're being very transparent about everything we're doing over there. We're not trying to hide the fact that we're in Canada, and we're just very happy to be, servicing that country. But my partner over there is in charge of distribution at that point as well, right? When I send that same load of flour to a province here in Canada, right? There's a whole bunch of different logistical issues, and I have to fund the sales and marketing of that in addition to the tax burden that I'm incurring here in Canada. So I have a whole lot of additional cost and stress and worry and potential returns I might get, if it doesn't sell at the OCS or in BC, I have to return it. So now when I'm looking at my map as a small producer with limited amounts of cannabis to sell in the first place, I'm like, okay, I think my favorite market is the international market. And then I think domestic medical markets are my next favorite market, because that's kind of similar when I sell to like Aurora or Abomedics or one of these medical providers. I send it to them and they have to worry about the distribution as well. And the Canadian rec markets, they end up in third place, right? Especially as a small producer.
Interesting. Deepak, I actually had a similar question that I see on our polls here. What markets do you think would be the most advantageous to get into now? And my kind of question was around, is it format, is it country, is it formulation? Like, where should, is there a specific focus, or is it fairly open to production?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, generalizing things, of course, if you look at the German market, flour is majority of the market, and there's a number of regulatory reasons why that's the case. But extracts are very quickly gaining popularity. In fact, percentage-wise, it's the fastest growing category within the cannabis sales. So, it really depends on the market and the different regulatory quirks that exist in each market. So from a German perspective, Tilray is doing a fantastic job with respect to gaining market share on the extract side, and it's because everyone's really been focused on flour. And this goes back to the whole regulatory stuff that we were talking about earlier, right? I think what Tilray, as an example, has done really well on the extract side is figured out the regulatory requirements that are needed to be able to have a product launched in that market. And, associated to that, what is it going to take to sell through to physicians? So what are physicians actually looking at? Which categories are actually growing? How do you educate those physicians? I think that's the kind of differentiation in 24 and 25 that companies are going to start to make. Very different from a market like Australia, where you can send in finished formulations like vapes, etc. And so I think that, companies that are looking at exporting need to be hyper focused on what is the market that you want to serve, because, in my personal opinion, I don't think this is a one size fits all approach where you're going to be able to sell flour all across the world. I think you need to be hyper focused on what is the product that you're selling, which market do you actually want to target, and then start to then figure out what unique products are you getting into the market, right? What we've seen so far has been 1.0, as we've seen in Canada. You've got flours basically been sold, and as long as you have a high THC, 25% flour, it'll fly off the shelves. Still holds true to a certain extent in Germany, but in 24, 25, you're going to start to see 2.0 come on, and we've seen this in Canada, right? Pre-rolls is the fastest growing segment in the market right now, and it's going to happen on strategic to start to look at which segment and which markets they want to focus in, and start to just be hyper focused on that.
Yeah, really understanding your market, where you want to play once again, and it's so. Thank you for that, because people often think about exports and sales. They automatically just think flour, flour, flour. But you bring a good point of the extracts being one of the fastest growing demand on the international market, and the pre rolls we know in Canada. I mean, it's a big thing. I can tell you on the east coast of Canada, we live on tourism for July and August, and it's hard pressed to find a pre-roll in New Brunswick during those months because all the tourists buy them. So, very good business to have, I guess, for tourist season. Chad, we earlier on, Deepak mentioned that you don't necessarily need to have certification to do some business around the world and all that stuff. It's just a matter of how you partner up or how you collaborate with certain companies. Did you have market opportunities prior to your certification? Because I believe your certification was received in 2023, correct? And you guys have been operating for a couple of years now.
Yeah, so we received the certification early this year, and we were audited towards the end of last year. But Deepak's 100% correct. It's not a one size fits all, and we definitely did have opportunities, and we did have markets that we could sell our product to. But things have definitely changed significantly, and a lot more doors have opened because of EU GMP, just because of its recognition across the globe. But at the end of the day, just because you have it doesn't mean you're going to sell product. What's going to determine whether you can sell that product or not, again, is quality, which is always coming up. But then each country that you export the product to is going to have their own requirements in terms of what's supposed to be on the COA, specifically being micro and terpenes and cannabinoids at the end of the day. But micro is the real barrier for most people. Um, but to answer your question in short, we did have markets, but it was a couple of doors. And after EU GMP, it became a lot easier for us to sit in the room with people that could be buying the product.
And I already know this answer, but this was asked from the audience. What percentage of your production goes to international markets compared to domestic in South Africa?
100%. So the current law in South Africa is that it's illegal to exchange remuneration for cannabis in the country. It's only legal for cultivation for export purposes.
Gotcha. Nice. So 100%. So you're completely going international compared to us, where we, a significant portion of our business in Canada is within Canada, and then we're looking at exploring other. Really, really interesting. Tanner, I'd like to just circle quickly on one comment that you mentioned earlier, how GMP has impacted your business. And so, has it impacted day to day, as in operationally? Has it make it harder for you? Like your processes, did you have to up certain processes that you didn't have to in the Canadian laws? Um, in short, is this a burden?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify there probably is quite a more work, and there might be a larger burden for an EU GMP certification versus a Canadian
Gotcha.
GMP certification. So I'll clarify that. But I can tell you that for us, it was just a bit of extra paperwork, a little bit of process improvement. See, and it depends on where you're at as a company, right? As well, we were already operating to good production practices, or arguably GMP level standards, regardless. So our audit was pretty straightforward. It was you should store some of these materials differently. Let's change this paperwork. You need to improve that paperwork. And it really did come down to minor adjustments in paperwork and process. And we look at it, and I tell the team too, you got to go into it with the right attitude, right? You can't so when we go to the next step to EU GMP later on, you sit down with the team and you say, listen, guys, it's going to be a lot more paperwork probably. We are going to have to be very creative on how to ensure this doesn't slow us down, right? Because
Correct.
that's the concern from a financial perspective, right? It's how much slower is this going to make us? But you go into it with the attitude of, we do know it's going to improve our quality, and this is going to make us better as a company. So it's like everything else in life, it's kind of attitude going in, right, in perspective. So
Yeah, Nico, if I can
Really
just
cool.
chime in on that one
Yes.
point, I think Tyler raises a really important point, and Chad brought up microbials, and I mean, don't underestimate the difference. For example, in the European market, and this is what I was saying earlier. Australia is completely different from Europe, right? If you're trying to get a product into the market in Europe, sure, irradiation becomes a popular method to look at, reducing microbial limits, but then there's a downside to irradiation, particularly in Germany, where you have to apply for something called an AMRAD V license or an AMRAD 5 license for irradiation. And it's not so much that license; it's the time that it takes to get an AMRAD V license. It's taken us over 9 months, for example, sitting in Malta to get that specific license. So now you're sitting on product for 9 months just waiting for a license. Now there are ways around that. You can figure out other ways to reduce microbial limits and certainly get creative on that. But it's not only paperwork, it's also processes, right? Are you now looking at cryopasteurization as opposed to traditional irradiation, and what is the regulatory standard there? So you just need to get very, very hyper focused, and I cannot underscore the importance of actually getting very deep into the regulatory knowledge on which market you're serving, because it's a make or break. And I've
That's
often seen companies go at it halfway and then get stuck, and so you want to make sure that you're looking at this holistically.
Yeah.
Very good
I
point.
I was going to say as well, to Deepak and Tanner's comments there earlier, like with these audits, like an Israeli audit, for instance, like we get the audit. How do you turn that into a positive? Well, it teaches you some practices that you maybe not you get a tighter ship. I find when you have these audits and you stay tighter, you stay more focused. They are expensive, but they do help process and they do help things happen. It doesn't make it easy, but it definitely limits who can really last the test of time as far as making that happen, type of thing, and keeping that consistently going and making sure things are followed to the T, type of thing.
Excellent. So some arduous work, but it's processes, but really in the end, understand where you want to go and where you want to play in and really educate yourself in that and continual growth, right? So just the one last question before we log off, because we're getting at the end of time here. I just, the one thing that I've heard whispers in the industry is people are afraid to get into the international market because is it going to affect or hurt their brand domestically? And Tanner, you mentioned earlier, you're like, man, my brand is exploding. It's going well. So Sean, I'd just like to throw this just quickly at Sean, just last couple of minutes. Is there brand recognition on the international market, or does this pose a risk for your domestic reputation at all? Because you said
Well,
you're
coming from
dealing with many different people.
coming from our startup was product first, brand recognition later. We didn't do any sort of East Can was a name that I think we went through GoDaddy or something just to come up with it. We were probably 2 years in the market before anybody, or a year in the market before we were even had a page. So we're not really, that wasn't really our focus. Our focus is international sales and finding really quality, high end quality cannabis for our partners, whether they be domestic or international.
Awesome. So thank you everybody.
Can I chime in on that
This is our
really quickly, Nico? Just
absolutely
one last
Deepak.
comment on
Go for
brand
it.
with respect to international. So I
Yes.
would say, from a reputation perspective, and this is back to the conversation we're having with Tanner, is, you could have a brand that you launch on the Canadian market that can go really well for you, and you could actually damage that if you don't pay attention internationally. We saw this very early happen with, both Aurora and Tilray. Is, they've had recalls on the international market because the international market holds a very different standard to the domestic market. So unintentionally, if you don't know what you're doing or you're naive and get into the market without doing your due diligence, you could have a recall on an international market, which could then force both consumers, patients, and regulators kind of look at what you're doing a little bit more seriously. So you do need to consider that as a factor. On the opposite side, you could have significant brand leverage, right? We've seen most recently, I think it was Cake and Caviar launch in Germany, and they've got a fantastic craft cannabis brand in Canada. And so you could leverage that. So there's both sides to that brand equation that you need to keep in mind when you're looking at international markets.
Can I ask a quick question?
We're ticking time, folks, but yes, quickly, we got another minute, so I'll give Tanner quickly, because Sean, you just spoke. Maybe give Tanner a few seconds.
Yeah, go ahead, Tanner. Yeah, for sure, buddy.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in on a personal level. When I got to finally call mom up and tell her that I'm an international drug dealer, that's pretty fucking cool, right there. I mean, so just on a personal, I'm running a cannabis company in Southern New Brunswick, St. Stephen, New Brunswick. We're exporting medical cannabis internationally, and that's cool. So
that is really cool.
Pretty cool.
Awesome. And Chad, does Saffron CANNA hold a brand internationally, or is it a product, a supply chain?
At this point, it's really just about the product at the end of the day. Most of our products are ending up being white label, and I think that's how it's going to be for quite some time. But yeah, the product speaks for itself, and that's always connected to the grower.
Awesome. Excellent final comment, Chad. Thank you for that. Always like to bring it back to the grower. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
this is our time. A really big thank you to our panelists. This was a phenomenal conversation. I have like another 8 questions that we could keep going for another hour, I'm sure. This should be a sit down chat with maybe something to smoke and drink as we're doing it, but it'd be a little bit far for Chad to come and meet us. So thank you, everybody, for this great panel. Just want to remind everybody to please subscribe to the CANNAtalk events. So you can find that information on canna.ca/CANNAtalk. So you should register there to get the newsletters and stay updated with all our events. We also post a review of our panels and things like that online. So lots of great information there, and lots of information for educational purposes. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope that everyone has a good rest of their day, and cheers.
Right on. Cheers, everyone. Nice meeting everyone.
Thanks. Nice meeting you guys. Shout out to my